Life recently has felt like a whirlwind, completely out of my hands. The relentless demands of work, the constant pull of people needing something, and the unending clamor of city life. It was all just too much. One evening, as I stared at an idyllic picture of a snow-covered winter landscape, towering evergreens against majestic mountains, the idea hit me. A solo hike. It seemed like the perfect way to escape, to quiet the chaos and find some clarity. Though I'm not an expert hiker, I've always been confident in my skills. I'd explored trails in the Sierra Nevada before, so this wasn't unfamiliar territory. The solitude, the quiet, there was something almost therapeutic about it. When I read about a particularly scenic trail that had remained accessible despite a recent snowstorm, I decided to give it a try. How hard could it be? I'd seen the news, reports of hikers disappearing in the area. It's not unusual. Mountains can be dangerous, but I felt prepared. Locals had issued stern warnings to stay off certain trails, claiming they were treacherous after the storm, but I brushed it off. I had experience. Early the next morning, I packed my gear, grabbed some snacks, and set out. My goal was to reach the summit before dusk, and an early start felt crucial. Arriving at the trailhead, something felt off. The parking lot was eerily empty, with only a few scattered cars. A strange unease settled over me, but I reasoned it away. It was winter after all. Most people preferred their warm beds to a snowy hike. Slinging my pack over my shoulder, I started down the trail. The crunch of my boots against the snow was the only sound, and the crisp air was invigorating. The forest around me was enchanting, the trees draped in fresh snow, their branches glittering like something out of a fairy tale. Yet, as I ventured deeper into the woods, the tranquility began to feel hollow. The stillness became unsettling. No birds chirped, no animals rustled in the underbrush. It was just me, the snow and the trees, and then came the feeling, that inexplicable sensation of being watched. I stopped, letting the silence press in around me. My breath formed little clouds in the freezing air, and I told myself it was nothing. But then, I heard it. The faint crunch of footsteps. At first I dismissed it as the wind or a distant echo, but then it came again, louder, closer. My heart started pounding. Someone was out there. I turned slowly, trying to stay calm, scanning the forest, but I saw nothing. The woods were empty, or so it seemed. Convincing myself it was just an animal, I pushed forward. The trail grew steeper and I focused on reaching my goal, but that eerie feeling of being followed never left me. As the day wore on and the light began to fade, the temperature plummeted. Needing a break, I veered off the trail into a small clearing. The silence was deafening. I could hear my own breath, the rustle of wind through the trees, but nothing else. Digging into my bag for a snack, I checked my phone. No signal as expected. That's when I heard it again. The footsteps. This time, they were unmistakable, deliberate and much closer. Panic surged through me. My eyes darted around the clearing, searching for the source, and then I saw him. At the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by trees, stood a man. At first glance, he seemed like another hiker, but something was off. He wasn't moving, just standing there, rigid, as if he were frozen in time. His clothes looked weathered and oversized, like they hadn't been changed in weeks. His face was pale and gaunt, and his eyes, those eyes were wide and unblinking, filled with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. I wanted to say something, but my throat felt like it had closed up. Then, as if he'd been waiting for me to acknowledge him, he stepped forward. The crunch of his boots in the snow was unnervingly loud. My heart raced as he stopped just a few feet away. "Are you lost?" he rasped, his voice dry and hoarse. "No," I managed to stammer. "I'm fine, just taking a break." He didn't move, didn't even blink. "It's dangerous out here," he said, his tone low and strange, "especially for someone like you." Something about his words made my skin crawl. I forced myself to step back. "I'll be fine," I said, trying to sound confident. But he didn't step aside. Instead, he moved closer too quickly. Startled, I stumbled backward. Before I could react, his hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with an iron grip. His hand was icy, his touch rough. Panic exploded inside me as I struggled to free myself. "Let go!" I yelled, my voice trembling. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment I thought I saw something glint in his other hand. A knife? I didn't wait to find out. Summoning every ounce of strength, I shoved him as hard as I could. He staggered but didn't fall. I grabbed a branch from the ground and swung it, hitting his shoulder. He barely flinched, but it was enough. I turned and ran. The snow made running difficult, the trail winding and slippery, but I didn't dare stop. My lungs burned and the cold bit through my clothes, but fear pushed me forward. Finally, I saw the trailhead sign. My car was just ahead. Fumbling with my keys, I threw myself inside, locking the doors behind me. Only then did I dare to look back. The clearing was empty. I didn't wait around. I drove away as fast as I could, not caring where I ended up. It wasn't until I'd been driving for what felt like hours that I finally stopped. My hands were shaking, my mind racing. The memory of his eyes, those unblinking, hollow eyes, haunts me to this day. I haven't been hiking alone since, and I'm not sure I ever will again. It started on a frosty November evening, the kind of night where the chill seeps into your bones and silence hangs thick in the air. My friend Kyle had asked me to house sit while he and his wife took a short vacation. They owned a sleek, modern home tucked away in a remote part of the hills, surrounded by towering trees and dense shadows. Although the place was beautiful, it was eerily isolated, and I wasn't sure I'd enjoy being so far from civilization. I arrived just as the sun began to dip behind the horizon. The house stood like a fortress, its sharp edges and large glass windows reflecting the fading golden light. As I stepped out of my car, the quiet was oppressive. The only sound was the crunch of my boots on the gravel driveway. Kyle had assured me that everything was in order. The security cameras worked, the motion-activated lights would keep the perimeter safe, and the two dogs, Bailey and Max, would be my loyal companions for the next few days. Bailey, the beagle, and Max, the Labrador, greeted me excitedly as I unlocked the front door. Their wagging tails and playful energy momentarily eased my unease. I unpacked my things and walked through the house, familiarizing myself with its layout. The interior was sleek and minimalist, with high ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the expansive backyard. The yard itself was vast, enclosed by a tall wooden fence that bordered the forest. It felt like a sanctuary, but the encroaching darkness made it seem more like a trap. After settling in, I let the dogs out to explore while I prepared a quick dinner. The kitchen was state-of-the-art, equipped with everything a chef could dream of, but the large windows facing the yard made me feel exposed. As night fell, the house took on a different character. The modern design, which had seemed so inviting in the daylight, now felt cold and unwelcoming. The lights inside were bright, but they only deepened the darkness outside. The motion-activated lights around the property flickered on occasionally, casting long shadows that seemed to dance across the yard. It wasn't until around 7 p.m. that things started to feel truly off. I was sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone, when the dogs suddenly perked up. Their ears stood at attention, and they both stared intently at the back door. I followed their gaze, but there was nothing there, just the inky blackness of the night. A moment later, the motion-activated lights at the back of the house turned on. I jumped slightly, my heart skipping a beat. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, maybe a raccoon or a stray cat, but the dog's behavior said otherwise. They didn't bark, but their low growls filled the air, a sound I'd never heard from them before. I decided to check it out. Grabbing a flashlight, I stepped onto the back patio, the cold air biting at my skin. The yard was still and quiet, the light illuminating patches of grass and the base of the fence. I scanned the area but saw no sign of movement. The forest beyond the fence was a wall of black, impenetrable and unnerving. As I turned to go back inside, I felt it. A strange, unsettling sensation, as though someone was watching me. I whipped around, shining the flashlight toward the fence, but there was nothing there, just shadows. My skin prickled as I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. The next couple of hours passed uneventfully, but the tension in the house was palpable. The dogs remained uneasy, pacing back and forth, their eyes constantly darting toward the windows. The motion lights continued to flicker sporadically, each time making my heart race. Around 10 p.m., the tapping started. It was soft at first, barely audible, like a branch brushing against the window. I dismissed it as the wind and tried to focus on the movie I had put on to distract myself. But the tapping grew louder and more insistent, like fingernails rapping against the glass. I muted the TV, my pulse quickening. The dogs were now standing by the back door, their bodies tense and their ears pinned back. Summoning my courage, I approached the window and peeked out. The yard was empty, but the tapping continued, now coming from the side of the house. I grabbed my phone and called Kyle. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Your motion lights keep going off, and now there's this tapping on the windows. Are there any security issues I should know about?" Kyle's voice was calm but concerned. "That's strange. The lights are usually reliable, and we've never had issues like that before. Are the dogs acting weird?" "They're on edge," I admitted. "If it keeps happening, maybe call the cops," he suggested. As soon as I hung up, the lights around the house flickered in quick succession, like something was circling the property. The tapping moved again, this time to the living room window. I felt a chill run down my spine. Whatever this was, it wasn't random. I called 911, my voice shaking as I explained the situation. "Stay inside, lock all doors and windows. Officers are on their way," the dispatcher assured me. I turned off the lights and sat in the dark, my phone clutched tightly in my hand. The tapping stopped, but the silence that followed was even worse. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside, sent my imagination into overdrive. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, and unmistakable. They crunched on the gravel just outside the living room window. I held my breath, straining to hear any other sounds. The dogs were now growling low, their bodies rigid as they stared at the door. When the police finally arrived, their flashing lights pierced the darkness, flooding the yard with an almost blinding brightness. I rushed to the door to let them in, my relief overwhelming. The officers searched the property and found him. A man dressed in dark clothing, crouched near the back fence with a knife in his hand. He had been watching me the entire time, waiting for the right moment to strike. The officers later told me he had been stalking the house for days, studying its layout and my routines. The thought of how close I had come to danger still haunts me. Even now, weeks later, I can't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I hear a noise in the night, I wonder if someone is out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their chance. It's been years, but that night still lingers in my mind. I often feel a chill in my spine when I recall how close I came to something unexplainable. It's as if I narrowly escaped a hidden danger, and the weight of it refuses to let go. You know the feeling, that nagging sense that you've dodged a bullet, but you'll never fully understand how or why. It happened during the winter, of course. Even in California, the desert nights can be unrelenting. The cold wasn't just physical, it seeped into your very bones, making it impossible to ignore. Being from Southern California, I wasn't accustomed to this kind of chill, but that night the air had a razor-sharp edge, biting through layers of clothing and making every breath feel like frost creeping into my lungs. The stillness of the night made the cold even more unbearable, like a foreboding presence wrapping itself around you. I was driving back from Los Angeles to my apartment in San Diego. Hours of monotonous driving had blurred the road ahead, the rhythm of the tires and the hum of the engine lulling me into a dangerous drowsiness. Realizing I couldn't make it the whole way without risking an accident, I decided to pull over and take a short break. I needed to clear my head, shake off the exhaustion, and ensure I wouldn't fall asleep behind the wheel. I found a quiet pull-off along the freeway, a desolate spot without any cars or streetlights. The silence was eerie, but it felt like a safe enough place to stop. I stepped out of the car, the cold air hitting me like a slap, and leaned against the hood, staring out at the dark, empty highway. The world felt unnervingly vast and deserted, like a void where anything could happen, and no one would know. After a few minutes, headlights appeared in the distance, growing closer. A van slowed as it approached, then came to a stop next to my car. The sudden intrusion startled me. At first, I thought it might be another traveler taking a break, but something about the way the van crept to a halt felt off. Then the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, his movements quick and jittery, as though he were in a hurry to reach me. His clothes were ill-fitting and worn, as if they hadn't been changed in years. His face was pale and haggard, dark circles beneath his eyes hinting at sleepless nights. He walked straight to my car and knocked on the window. It wasn't a friendly tap, it was a sharp, deliberate knock that made my heart race. "You've got a flat tire," he said, his voice gravelly and strained. His breath hung in the cold air between us as I glanced at my tires, squinting to see in the dim light. Everything looked fine, but I wasn't sure. Maybe he'd seen something I hadn't. "Are you sure?" I asked, keeping my voice steady even as unease crept into my chest. He nodded quickly, his eyes darting around as though scanning the shadows for something, or someone. Yeah, I was driving behind you, saw it go flat a while back. I hesitated. His nervous energy made my instinct scream that something wasn't right, but I told myself I was overreacting. People help each other all the time, right? Against my better judgment, I opened the door and stepped out. The moment I did, everything changed. The man's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with a grip like iron. His fingers were icy, and his strength caught me off guard. He yanked me toward him, his breath reeking of stale cigarettes and something metallic. Panic surged through me as I struggled to pull away, shouting, "What are you doing? Let go!" He didn't respond. His bloodshot eyes locked onto mine, his expression blank but filled with a chilling determination. He began dragging me towards the open door of his van. The interior was pitch black, an ominous void that seemed to swallow the light around it. Every instinct I had screamed that stepping into that darkness would mean the end. Desperation fueled me. I kicked him as hard as I could, my boot connecting with his stomach. He grunted and staggered back, his grip loosening just enough for me to break free. Without thinking, I bolted back to my car, slamming the door shut and locking it in one fluid motion. My hands trembled as I fumbled to start the engine, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't look back as I sped off, the van disappearing in my rearview mirror. I drove until I found a gas station, my breaths coming in short, ragged gasps. It took me several minutes to calm down enough to call the police and explain what had happened. The officers arrived, but by the time they reached the pull-off, the van was gone. They tracked it down hours later, hidden off the highway. The man was arrested, and I learned he had a history, a chilling one. He had been targeting drivers on desolate roads, luring them out of their cars with fabricated stories before attempting to abduct them. The police told me I was lucky, and I believed them. To this day, I can't stop thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't reacted the way I did. The image of his face, the cold grip of his hand, and the darkness of that van still haunt me. I'll never pull over on an empty highway again, no matter what. Sometimes I wonder what drove him to do what he did. Was I just a random target, or did he have a specific plan? I'll never know. All I can say is that night changed me. It's a reminder of how thin the line is between safety and danger, and how easily it can be crossed. It began like any other road trip. Mark and I, best friends since high school, decided to take a weekend drive to Northern California. It wasn't a big deal, just a casual journey. We'd been to Los Angeles a few times, but the North was uncharted territory for us. We didn't make any plans, we just hit the highway, excited to see where the road would take us. There's something liberating about driving with no specific destination, just soaking in the adventure. It was winter and the mountains were draped in snow, making everything look like a scene out of a holiday card. The barren trees, their branches reaching skyward like skeletal fingers, lined the winding highway. The road twisted through the snowy hills, with hardly another car in sight. Honestly, I found it peaceful. There's a unique calmness to being in such isolation, where your thoughts almost echo around you. Hours passed as we drove, the soft hum of the radio filling the air. But then, the snow began falling harder, swirling and dancing in the wind, as if nature was trying to send us a message. The road grew slick, and the temperature plummeted, yet our spirits remained high. We joked, chatted about nonsense, and marveled at the beauty around us. Around late afternoon, we found ourselves on a stretch of road that seemed to stretch endlessly. No signs of civilization, just snow, bare trees, and the faint silhouette of distant peaks. We hadn't seen another car in over 30 minutes, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, the world around us turned a cold, bluish grey, a colour unique to winter evenings. The stillness felt eerie, though not enough to unsettle us, at least not at first. Then I noticed it. Something standing at the roadside caught the corner of my eye. I thought it was a shadow or a trick of the light at first, but as we approached I realized it was a snowman. It was perfectly crafted, complete with a carrot nose, coal eyes, and a scarf tied neatly around its neck. Its immaculate condition felt strange, as if someone had placed it there moments ago. The odd part, there were no footprints in the snow, no signs that anyone had been nearby to build it. It stood alone, seemingly in the middle of nowhere, on the edge of the highway. I glanced at Mark, and his uneasy expression mirrored my own. "That's weird," he muttered, his voice low. "It didn't make sense. There wasn't a town or house for miles. Who would build a snowman out here?" Despite the weirdness, curiosity pulled us in. I slowed the car and parked a short distance away. "Let's check it out," I suggested, trying to sound casual. "Maybe it's just a prank or something random." Mark hesitated, but eventually nodded. I grabbed my phone, thinking it'd be fun to take a picture of this odd roadside attraction, something to laugh about later. As I stepped out, the biting cold hit me like a slap. Walking closer to the snowman, I started feeling uneasy. There was something off about it. Its posture seemed too deliberate, almost like it had been posed. Its head tilted slightly as if watching me. Those coal-button eyes felt too lifelike, like they were following my every move. I shook off the feeling, laughing quietly at myself. "It's just a snowman," I whispered, snapping a few photos. But the air around me felt different, colder, heavier. My breath clouded the air in short, sharp puffs, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. I turned back to the car where Mark sat watching me, his face pale and tense. "You okay?" I called out, trying to sound upbeat. He didn't answer right away. Instead, his gaze shifted behind me, his expression darkening with fear. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. I froze, straining to listen. At first I thought he was just spooked, but then I heard it too. A rustling sound, faint but deliberate, came from the nearby trees. It wasn't the wind or a small animal. It was calculated, like someone or something was hiding nearby. I turned slowly, my heart pounding. That's when I saw him. A figure stepped out from behind one of the large pine trees. He moved slowly, deliberately, like he'd been watching us. Dressed in a dark hooded jacket, his face obscured, he gripped something in his hand, a crowbar. Panic surged through me. This wasn't a random hiker. This person had a purpose, and it wasn't good. My voice dropped to a whisper as I addressed Mark. "Get in the car, now." Mark didn't respond, frozen in fear. "Is he coming toward us?" he finally stammered. I didn't wait to find out. The man wasn't walking anymore. He was sprinting, the crowbar glinting ominously in the fading light. I shoved Mark toward the car, yelling, "Go! Get in!" We scrambled inside, slamming the doors just as the man reached us. His hand slapped against the window, the sound echoing in the confined space. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking, and finally started the engine. As I floored the gas pedal, the tires spun on the icy road before finding traction. The man gave chase, running impossibly fast through the snow, his figure a dark blur in the mirror. My chest tightened as adrenaline coursed through me, but eventually we gained distance. We didn't stop until we reached a gas station miles away. Breathing heavily, we parked and sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. I dialed 911 and told the dispatcher everything, the snowman, the man with the crowbar, and how we barely escaped. When the police arrived, we led them back to the spot, but by the time we returned, there was no sign of the man or the snowman. It was as if nothing had happened. The officer offered a grim warning. "Could have been a trap to lure people. You're lucky you got away." Mark and I nodded silently, still shaken. We finished the drive home in silence, the snowman's eerie presence haunting my thoughts. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that it was a lure, a sinister invitation, and I can't help but wonder what might have happened if we'd hesitated just a moment longer. That's it for today's tale from Horror Tales. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers as always. The Horror Tales thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the vault awaits your return.